Before we dive into today's breaking update, let me ask you something. Do you honestly believe a president should be allowed to send out $2,000 checks without Congress approving it first? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. Your opinion really matters because millions of Americans are watching this debate unfold. And if you want the truth without the hype, hit the like button and subscribe to Social Security Post, where we break down every policy affecting your money, your benefits, and your future. Now let's get into the details, and today's update might surprise a lot of people. The past 48 hours have generated headlines claiming the White House is actively reviewing ways to deliver $2,000 tariff dividend checks, even if Congress refuses to support the plan. Officials confirmed that teams inside the administration are assessing whether existing tariff revenue can be used under executive authority without triggering the constitutional requirement for new spending approval. This is significant because any attempt to bypass Congress directly challenges the long-standing principle that elected legislators, not the president, control federal spending decisions. At the same time, White House advisors have made it clear that the president wants immediate movement. They believe that public pressure and economic conditions could justify exploring every legal route available, even if those routes are uncertain or untested. But while these headlines sound bold, the reality is more complicated. The administration is not saying this will happen, only that they want to know if it's legally possible. That distinction matters, and it shapes the entire conversation going forward. A growing wave of commentators, blog writers, and YouTubers argue that executive orders allow a president to simply shift money around and issue emergency-style payments without the involvement of Congress. Their argument relies heavily on the 2020 FEMA unemployment boost, claiming that since Trump used existing FEMA disaster funds to provide 300 to 400 weekly unemployment bonuses during the pandemic, he could do the same now using tariff revenue. In their view, the president has a toolbox of authority that can unlock payments whenever Congress stands in the way. But it highlights a major flaw. 2020 was an entirely different legal environment. At that time, the United States was under a declared national emergency, unemployment exceeded 20 million workers, and FEMA's disaster relief fund had billions of dollars already assigned for emergency response. Those unique conditions allowed a temporary redirection of funds without violating the Constitution. In 2026, however, there is no comparable national emergency declaration, no FEMA-based justification, and no federal rule that classifies tariff rebates as emergency relief. This means the executive order option is far weaker legally and cannot be assumed to work the same way it did in 2020. In 2020, COVID-19 forced all branches of government to accept extraordinary measures. Congress had already injected trillions into emergency funds, and multiple federal agencies were granted temporary flexibility under emergency declarations. Because unemployment levels spiked to historic highs, FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund was treated as an emergency financing mechanism for millions who suddenly had no income. The global health crisis also led dozens of countries, from Canada to Brazil, to distribute stimulus payments without traditional parliamentary or legislative approvals. The world was reacting to a once-in-a-century crisis. 2026 is nothing like that. There's no federal emergency declaration, no pandemic-level economic collapse, and no statutory pathway that allows tariff revenue to be reclassified as disaster relief. Tariff revenue is categorized as federal income, not emergency funding. This means the president cannot legally copy-paste pandemic-era actions into a normal economic year. Your analysis strongly supports the conclusion that tariff rebate checks in 2026 would still require a congressional appropriation. Without it, executive action would likely face immediate legal challenges. And, unlike 2020, these challenges would probably succeed. Despite the legal roadblocks, the White House continues to emphasize that the president is personally committed to delivering the $2,000 checks. Officials have stated that income thresholds currently floated around $100,000 per household, are under consideration, but nothing is finalized. The administration is trying to design a program that targets middle-income workers while avoiding accusations of excessive spending or inflationary pressure. Yet, even with their enthusiasm, no concrete legal structure has been put into place. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent openly admitted that checks are not fully designed and that key questions remain unresolved, including who qualifies, how payments would be funded, and what timeline is realistic. Even within the administration, advisors are split on whether executive authority can legally support this plan. Some believe aggressive interpretation of existing laws might work. Others warn that attempting to bypass Congress would risk immediate judicial intervention. This internal disagreement shows how uncertain the process truly is. Supporters of the idea argue that tariff revenue has increased dramatically and provides a sufficient funding source for the payments. President Trump has publicly stated that trillions are coming in from tariffs. However, independent budget researchers paint a far less dramatic picture. Yale University's Budget Lab estimates that total tariff revenue for an entire year falls between $200 billion and $300 billion, depending on international trade patterns. For context, U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that as of September 30th, the federal government collected $195 billion in tariff revenue. Compare those figures to the cost of a nationwide $2,000 dividend. If the payment were distributed to every American, including children, the total price tag would reach approximately $600 billion. Even if the program targeted only working-class households, the cost would still exceed available tariff revenue. This imbalance is critical because executive actions cannot spend more than the funds legally available. That financial gap is another reason why executive-only payments are extremely unlikely without a congressional appropriation to authorize the difference. The Supreme Court is currently reviewing cases that challenge the president's authority to declare national emergencies for tariff expansion. Several justices have already expressed skepticism, raising doubts about whether these tariffs, the same ones expected to fund the checks, will even survive legal review. If the court rules against the administration, the federal government could be forced to refund tariffs to importers, effectively eliminating the revenue source for the proposed $2,000 payments. Meanwhile, congressional resistance is growing. Many Republican lawmakers oppose using tariff funds for direct payments, arguing the money should be applied toward reducing the $34 trillion national debt. Others believe tariff revenue belongs to taxpayers but should be returned through structured tax credits rather than one-time checks. Speaker Mike Johnson has hinted that congressional approval is likely required, suggesting that any attempt to bypass Congress would trigger legislative confrontation. This shows that even within the president's party, support is far from unanimous. So my analysis here at Social Security Post is, in 2026, the president does not have a strong legal foundation to issue $2,000 checks without congressional approval. Executive orders cannot create new spending. They can only redirect funds already assigned to similar purposes. Since tariff revenue is not emergency funding, the legal justification simply isn't there. The White House may be exploring options, but exploration is not execution, and the constitutional barrier is real. The most realistic scenario is that Congress will need to pass a bill or include the program in a reconciliation package. Whether lawmakers will agree is uncertain, especially when many Republicans prefer using tariff revenue to manage the national debt. While the administration's commitment is genuine, the pathway is complicated, and major parts of the proposal depend on political negotiations that have not yet started. Still, millions of Americans are hopeful, and we will continue tracking every update as it unfolds. Thanks for watching Social Security Post. What do you think? Should the president push forward through executive action or wait for Congress to approve the checks? Drop your answer below. And if you want daily, honest, and clear updates on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, SNAP, and all federal benefits, hit like, subscribe, and stay connected. More updates are on the way.